Good evening everyone. Welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 2nd August 2025 and today we have some very important topics from the Hindu newspaper. So one by one we'll try to discuss all these topics in a detailed and in-depth manner. And the first topic with which we're going to start this session is about India and UK Free Trade Agreement and concerns with respect to India's digital sovereignty. An important article has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this could be important for your general studies paper 2 as well as paper 3. So let's understand the context of the topic before going into the details of this topic. Now the context is that we all knew that India and UK have signed a free trade agreement, and this free trade agreement is also known as the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, which is CETA. Right. So however, this free trade agreement between India and UK has been hailed by the government as a landmark digital trade agreement and a potential for economic partnership between India and UK and further strengthening the trade relations. However, there are some experts who have been arguing that this India-UK free trade agreement potentially compromises India's digital sovereignty. So therefore, in this topic, we'll be understanding how this free trade agreement compromises India's digital sovereignty. Now, when we talk about this free trade agreement, particularly compromising on India's digital sovereignty, there are key concessions provided on source code access and open government data. Both source code access and open government data raised long-term strategic as well as the regulatory concerns on the part of India, because both source code access and open government data have ignored the official discourse. They are actually ignored in official discourse of India-UK Free Trade Agreement. So therefore, the trade negotiations between India and UK, they have sparked a debate on the balance between market access benefits and digital autonomy. Now, it is very important that every country should protect its digital sovereignty, and every country would have its own digital autonomy as well. And balancing market access benefits through free trade agreements along with protecting digital autonomy is very important for every country's trade with other country. So let's understand this in a very detailed manner. India and UK Free Trade Agreement. So it primarily considers agriculture and manufacturing as sensitive sectors. Right? So this free trade agreement has been signed, but it has been considering only agriculture and manufacturing as sensitive sectors. But digital sector is also a sensitive sector, but this free trade agreement failed to consider digital sector as a sensitive sector, because as of now the digital sector underpins all domains of national security and economy. If I can tell you in a simple words, digital sector heavily influences India's economy and it also influences the national security as well. Not just the national security and the economy, but digital sector also influence or extends to crucial areas like financial services and legal services. But the problem with India and UK Free Trade Agreement is that it failed to consider digital sector as a sensitive sector. Right? So digital sector is also a very crucial sector. So therefore, it should be considered as a key sector or a sensitive sector. Now we all knew that last one decade India has been going through rapid digitization. However, India failed to treat its digital economy as a sensitive sector. And that is the reason why India did not consider digital economy as a sensitive sector in its free trade agreement with UK. Now when India failed to consider digital economy as a sensitive sector, then its digital sector will be vulnerable to the external influence through trade deals, and it will potentially impact the trade surplus of India as well. However, the other major problem why India is not considering the digital sector as a sensitive sector is there is a minimal public and media attention to the digital provisions of the agreement. both media and public are well aware about the agriculture and manufacturing related provisions in the free trade agreement, but there is a very minimal public and media attention to the digital provisions of the agreement. So therefore it has been reflecting that there is no awareness on this, right? So therefore there should be a public and media attention also on the digital sector, which is very sensitive, which is very important for India's data sovereignty and the national security as well. And in fact, the other major problem is India's digital sector lacks strong political constituency. Now, when I say strong political constituency, it actually means that, for example, for manufacturing sector, for agricultural sector, so there is a lobby which lobbies for the betterment or for the better provisions of agricultural and manufacturing and industry. But for the digital sector, such political constituency is absent, right? So as I have already told you, for labor, for agricultural, there are trade unions, agricultural unions, right? So there is a strong political constituency for agriculture, labor and industry, but it is absent for the digital sector. So because of this absence, it leads to undue policy negligence when it comes to the digital sector, right? So there are a lot of concerns with respect to the digital sector, but these concerns are largely neglected because there is a lack of strong political constituency on this sector. However, if we ignore the digital domain's sensitivity or digital sector's sensitivity, so it might lead to long-term dependency, much like India's past experience with colonial economic structures, and it will potentially impact the job creation in India and the export competitiveness as well. Now for India, export competitiveness is very important to increase exports, and creation of large scale gainful employment opportunities is also very important so that we can sustainably use our existing demographic dividend. So I hope you have understood this topic. Now let's understand what exactly is a source code disclosure retreat. And in fact, this free trade agreement also have the provisions for the source code disclosure. So that could potentially have some implications for India's data sovereignty and the digital security, right? So therefore, disclosure is considered as important for safety, compliance and upgrades in several sectors such as telecom sector, artificial intelligence, healthcare, education, especially in real time. However, this can also affect government procurement processes as well, right? So the source code disclosure might affect government procurement processes as well. Now in fact, countries like US, so they even rolled back similar restrictions on the source code disclosures, right? For example, if you are doing a trade with any other country, if that particular country asks us to disclose the source code, now it will have some concerns for us. So therefore, countries like US, they have even understood such concerns, so they have rolled back similar restrictions. So recognizing the security risks and the regulatory needs which are associated with this source code access. But what is surprising is in India and UK free trade agreement, there is source code access has been given, particularly in the post-Brexit trade. However, the UK deal applies to all software, right? So India and UK free trade agreement, India-UK free trade agreement applies to all software, but it is not like comprehensive and progressive trans-Pacific partnership because it has excluded certain critical infrastructure and custom-made software. But unlike this, India-UK free trade agreement applies to all software items or products. So therefore, there is a clear source code disclosure, and that could pose security risks, and there is a need for the regulation as well. However, this broad approach could affect various sectors, including those using the facial recognition tools as well. However, these digital rules are not like the commodity tariffs. right? Because commodity tariffs are different from the digital rules, because once these digital rules are agreed by all the parties, they shape the global digital order and are there also hard to undo, and thereby potentially impacting the future trade negotiations between India and other potential countries as well, right? So secondly, granting open access to data, how it poses challenges, because there are also provisions with respect to granting open access to data in India UK free trade agreement. Now once a tool for transparency, granting open access to data is considered as a tool for transparency, but now open government data, it also includes important data sets, and these data sets also used for artificial intelligence development, analytics, and therefore it raises several questions about data exclusivity and different other clauses as well. So therefore, allowing for equal and non-discriminatory access to this data will actually give UK companies a potential leverage, right? So it will benefit the UK companies in building artificial intelligence on Indian data. Now if they build artificial intelligence on Indian data, it will affect India's generic pharmaceutical industry, right? So therefore these concerns must be understood, and India must be carefully navigated as well. And third, unfettered access to the open data or government data would further increases the vulnerability to cyber attacks, and even it leads to the data weaponization as well. So therefore India should be very careful when it has been providing access to its data, because it will lead to data weaponization and it will also be vulnerable to the cyber attacks, and ultimately it will lead to compromising on national security and potentially affecting its UPI transactions as well. And similarly, India also face the risk of losing its competitive advantage in developing the artificial intelligence with its data and other digital solutions as well. And artificial intelligence and solutions will decide the local needs, potentially affecting the professional consulting services. However, the clause is not binding. Yet it sets dangerous precedent in treating data as a shared global resource, but not a national one, and that could impact the revenue sharing arrangements between India and potential partners such as UK as part of this India-UK free trade agreement. Now, what is the need for digital policy framework? Right? So what exactly there is a need for digital policy frameworks? So for this, India must immediately draft a digital sovereignty policy, right? So this digital sovereignty policy should guide all future digital trade technology related decisions, including the aspects of the reciprocal tariffs. And apart from that, there should be negotiation teams, and these negotiation teams from technology, cybersecurity experts, they can better understand the data governance, infrastructure, software which is at stake when we have been signing a free trade agreement with countries like UK, and that would result in a better and effective trade negotiations with such countries. And in fact, the top level leadership from India must be engaged to protect the strategic digital interests as well. So they should better understand the strategic digital interests. So apart from understanding the strategic digital interests, they should also try to protect the short-term trade goals, long-term trade goals, and the strategic digital interests as well, right? So the political leadership must keep in mind the broader implications of economic partnerships. So therefore there should be policies on artificial intelligence, data protection, cyber law, and the digital industry. So all these different domains, they should combine and converge into a single framework that could potentially address the cross-border data flows in an efficient and effective manner. So finally, India must position itself as a norm maker, because India is a country with a huge data, or in fact India has made a rapid strides in digitization. So therefore India should behave itself as a norm maker rather than the passive rule taker, right? So particularly the post Brexit trade deals with any other country, India should be a norm maker in the global digital governance, effectively protecting its data sovereignty. So India should understand all potential concerns and thereby effectively trying to protect its data sovereignty or digital sovereignty is what India needs to do at this moment. So I hope you have understood this topic. And the next important topic, so let's understand about the health of India's economy, because this is in the context of recent remarks made by US President Donald Trump that India's economy is a dead economy. But experts argue, and the data also shows us, that India is the fastest growing major economy in the world. Now, what is the context? The context is that US President Donald Trump recently has made some remarks about Indian economy. He called Indian economy a dead economy. And apart from that, he also imposed 25% tariffs on Indian exports to US. So therefore, this 25% tariffs to US along with penalties for India's military and energy purchases from Russia. So therefore, it has ignited the political exchange in India. However, the opposition leaders have agreed with Trump's criticism, blaming the government for killing India's economy. And the opposition leaders are also agreed with what Donald Trump has said, that India's economy is a dead economy, or the government has been killing India's economy. However, the government on the other hand defended India's economic performance, and it has highlighted its rise from the fragile 5 to one of the world's top 5 economies. And as of now, India is the 4th largest economy in terms of GDP. So therefore, India aimed to become the 3rd largest economy by the year 2030. And India also aimed to become a $5 trillion economy. But as of now, India is a $4 trillion economy. So let's understand the status or the state of India's economy or health of India's economy. Now, whatever Donald Trump has said about India's economy, which is a dead economy. So as per Donald Trump, India's economy is a dead economy. But the data that we have, it contradicts Donald Trump's remarks on India's economy. Because the data from the International Monetary Fund, so it clearly shows that over the past 30 years, India's economy is one of the fastest growing major economy in the world. So from 1995 to 2025, India's GDP has grown nearly 12 times. So there is a 12 times increase in India's overall GDP as per the International Monetary Fund. And therefore, India is one of the fastest growing major economies in the world, second only to China. So therefore, India has been registering a rapid rise or rapid growth in its GDP. So in comparison with the US economy, so in comparison to the US economy, Indian economy has grown fourfold. However, the key allies like US, UK, Germany, so they have expanded by less than 3 times and less than 2 times respectively. For example, UK has expanded less than 3 times and Germany has expanded less than 2 times. So compared to all these countries, India is one of the fastest growing major economy in the world. However, notably, Japan's GDP in the year 2025 is lower than its 1995 level. So therefore, there is an economic stagnation. So despite such a situation, despite COVID-19 pandemic, India was able to recover quickly, and India remains the fastest growing major economy in the world. However, the data underscores that India and even Russia, so despite facing several challenges, they have exhibited the robust economic growth, debunking their narrative of them being the dead economies, right? So the data that is available from IMF, from World Bank. So that data reveals that India still remains the fastest growing major economies in the world. India's economy is not a dead economy, right? So now India is part of some economies which are the fastest growing major economies in the world, and I would say that India's economy is growing faster than the US economy. Now if you look at US economic growth, it is just 1.8 percentage in the year 2025, but if you look at India's economic growth, it is 6.2 percentage, right? So Chinese economic growth is 4.0 percentage. So therefore India is now the fastest growing major economies in the world. Now when we compare India's economic growth with the US and only three countries, so China, India and Russia, so they have expanded their share of global economy over the past 30 years. And in fact, India, which was less than 5% of the size of US economy in the year 1995, so it has grown nearly 14% by 2025. Now India's economy is 14% to the US economy, but in the year 1995 it was just 5% to the US economy. However, in contrast to America's traditional allies and trade partners including UK, Germany and Japan, so they have all seen their economic shrinks in size relative to the US, right? So therefore India's economic growth is faster than US and its allies as well. So this is called as a remarkable economic growth registered by India. So therefore this highlights impressive economic ascent on the part of India, defying claims of being a dead economy. So India is no longer a dead economy because India is the fastest growing major economy, and India is also registering higher growth rate than the US. Right? So however, despite India has been registering the highest growth rate or the fastest growth rate, so there are some structural challenges, and these structural challenges were marked by India's economic growth. So let's understand what are the structural challenges that we have as of now. Now the context is that Trump says that India's economy is a dead economy. However, India is the fastest growing major economy, right? So India is growing at more than 6% per annum. However, this major growth rate has been concealing certain structural issues or structural challenges that India has been facing. Now since 2011-12, so India's growth rate has slowed down. Now failing to replicate 8 to 9% surge seen before 2008 global financial crisis. So before global financial crisis 2008, so India's economic growth rate was around 8 to 9% every annum. But after 2008 global financial crisis, so India's economic growth was somewhere around 6%, right? So India is not able to grow at 8 to 9% per annum. However, unlike China's rapid expansion, so India's GDP has grown at a much slower pace. Now in global trade also, India holds just 1.8% share in the global trade, right? So in terms of goods it is 1.8%, in terms of services it is 4.5%, right? So this is India's share in goods and services. And similarly, Indian economy is categorized as the protectionist when it comes to agriculture, right? So with respect to agriculture, Indian economy is still called as protectionist economy or a closed economy. So India is very sensitive with respect to agriculture. India don't allow the other countries' agricultural imports into India. However, the protectionist nature of Indian agriculture sector is because of the distress and the subsistence level farming due to the failure of manufacturing to absorb the surplus rural labor. Now in fact in India, the agriculture sector is failed to absorb the excess workforce which is engaged in the agriculture sector into the manufacturing sector, right? So therefore we don't have a strong manufacturing base. If we have a strong manufacturing base, the manufacturing sector would be able to absorb excess workforce from the agriculture sector. So that is a major problem, and that's why so India's economy is still a protectionist economy with respect to the agriculture sector. And similarly, manufacturing also lagged behind. So manufacturing contribution to India's GDP is less than 25%, right? So the economic growth is also highly unequal in India, with 24% of India's population are still below poverty line, and there is also higher levels of economic inequality existing in India, and this could also be another major structural challenge that India has been facing. And the other major aspect is human development indicators. Now health, education, and skill development, employment quality, employment generation, so they all remain poor, right? So therefore human resources development is also very poor in India compared to several other emerging economies like China, right? So high skilled unemployment existing, low female workforce participation is also another major problem. So these factors have been highlighting the deep rooted socio-economic challenges which need an urgent attention from the government, right? So these are some structural challenges that India has been facing. So if we are able to address such structural challenges, India would grow faster than the most of the economies, and India can also achieve most of its aspirations, such as becoming the third largest economy, India achieving the $5 trillion economy goal, and India becoming the Vikasit Bharat, or the developed country, by the year 2047. So India can achieve all these objectives easily, right? So the next important topic is recently Supreme Court has made certain remarks on Himachal Pradesh environmental disaster. So let's understand this. The Supreme Court has said that entire Himachal may vanish because of the environmental degradation that has been taking place, because of the construction that has been taking place in fragile areas, tourism pressure, and human apathy towards the environmental conservation and environmental protection. So let's understand the context in a very brief way. The context is that recently the Supreme Court has taken a suo motu cognizance, right? So nobody filed a petition, a public interest litigation, but Supreme Court itself has taken a suo motu cognizance of escalating environmental crisis in the state of Himachal Pradesh. And this escalating environmental crisis is because of three factors. One is unscientific construction, right, which has been taking place in Himachal Pradesh, and the tourism pressure that the fragile environment has been facing, and the human apathy to protect the natural environment. Now all these factors over a period of time leading to the floods, landslides, and the other ecological damage. So keeping this in mind, the Supreme Court has remarked that entire Himachal Pradesh may vanish if urgent attention is not paid to this problem. So therefore the Supreme Court has warned of severe consequences without urgent sustainable development measures and a new plan to address the Himachal Pradesh disaster situation. Now let's understand the court observations and immediate action taken on this aspect. Now earlier the Supreme Court has dismissed a resort's plea against Himachal's construction restriction notification for Taramata Hill, right? So therefore it has warned that Himachal Pradesh may vanish into thin air if current practices continue. This is what the Supreme Court has said, right? So in fact the Supreme Court has also blamed the unscientific construction which has been taking place in an unregulated way and greedy tourism promotion in Himachal Pradesh for recent natural disasters which have been taking place, and the public apathy as well which is existing. And the Supreme Court has also emphasized on need for disaster risk reduction measures. Now when we talk about the disaster risk reduction measures, we need to talk about the Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction and Hugo framework on disaster risk reduction. So these are two frameworks at the international level which talks about the disaster risk reduction and building resilient infrastructure. It has even criticized the use of explosives and heavy machinery for road construction, because that could weaken the mountain slopes and that may trigger landslides, floods, flash floods, right? So therefore the Supreme Court has suggested exploring the soil bioengineering techniques, because that could be more sustainable when it comes to building roads. And in fact, the Supreme Court has also sought an action plan from the state government by August 25th, thereby emphasizing on the need for urgency in tackling crisis and also implementing a new plan of action for sustainable development to protect the fragile environment in Himachal Pradesh. So let's understand the environmental concerns and ecological impact in the state of Himachal Pradesh, right? So therefore there are certain issues which needs attention. The issues including rampant deforestation which has been taking place, and receding glaciers, and the zonal violations in hotel and resort constructions, right? So tourism sector and construction of roads with heavy machinery, along with that the rampant illegal constructions. So therefore all these factors are leading to deforestation, receding glaciers, and zonal violations as well, right? So these factors have been leading to the noise pollution, traffic congestion, water overuse. So therefore it completely threatens the Himalayan ecosystem if such practices go on unaddressed or unrestricted. And in fact, the court has also stressed on the need for opinions from the geologists, local communities, and even the environmental experts, so that they can actually help address the Himachal disaster situation, right? So this is a comprehensive plan of action. So they can actually suggest some solutions, and those solutions will help address the existing disaster like a situation in the state of Himachal Pradesh, right? So it is based on a consensus oriented community based conservation plan. And in fact, in the state of Himachal Pradesh, flash floods and landslides, so they become more frequent and more intensive also in recent times, especially in places like Kullu, Mandi, Shimla and Chamba. However, the court has clearly reiterated that revenue generation cannot come at the cost of the environmental destruction. So yes, it is important that we need to balance the environmental conservation with the economic growth. But the revenue generation aspirations cannot come at the cost of the environmental destruction, and this is what the Supreme Court has said. And the Supreme Court bench has also called for improved solid waste management, increased sewage treatment capacity for the state as well. And emphasis was also placed on exploring the renewable energy sources to reduce the environmental impact, environmental footprint of the carbon, and also promote the sustainable development in the region. And it is also very important to regulate the construction and the tourism industry, and there is a need for the community participation in the conservation of fragile ecosystem and environment in the state of Himachal Pradesh. So let's understand the environmental jurisprudence of the Supreme Court. So what important steps that the Supreme Court has taken to protect and conserve the environment? Now, Supreme Court has invoked Article 21, which talks about the right to life and personal liberty, to uphold the environmental protection as well, because Article 21 is a broad right. It also includes several rights, and environmental protection is also part of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. And in fact, through public interest litigation suo motu cognizans, the Supreme Court has addressed issues like deforestation, pollution, and even the unsustainable development that has been taking place. And in fact, there were past cases also which are considered as landmark judgments on the part of the Supreme Court. For example, Tehri Dam, Vellore leather industry, and Ganga pollution. So therefore, the Supreme Court has set a clear legal precedent in all these previous cases. And courts which can balance the development needs with ecological sustainability are under a precautionary principle, right? So in fact, the judiciary also proactively promotes the environmental impact assessment, adherence to the zoning laws to safeguard the fragile ecosystems, and also implement effective disaster reduction measures, right? So therefore, the judiciary also plays a very important role when it comes to the environment protection as well, because the government listens to the judiciary. They also take some proactive measures to protect and conserve environment and the ecosystem, right? So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much.